like you, but I'm happy that you're here, at least for some time. And then I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Smita, and my educational teaching journey has been around 15 years. But with the IB diploma program, I've been associated since last 7 to 8 years. And as a diploma program coordinator around like 5 years. And the subject that I teach is computer science. So let's, start with our session. So, we've all been a part of the session since morning. At least I've attended a few of them, and starting from the keynote speaker to Mr. Shekhar's session. And you all must have, already gathered so much about formative assessments. And I was concerned about this thing right from the day I realized that there are a lot of other people presenting in the session in terms of what, something different that we have to offer you. Because if you're joining a session for this duration, we should have something for you to take away from the session. So I've tried to include a few, as many things as I could in the duration that we have, so that at least you'll have some takeaway at the end of this particular session, different from what you've already kind of acquired through the morning session. And the only thing I would like to, express here before even we start with it is in terms of, that we all know about it. Like, I think all of you have joined here know about formative assessments, why it is important, everything. But every time I think we interact with each other, because we have an interactive session is what we want to have, I think there's always something to learn from the other person, experiences, or whatever knowledge they're bringing to the table. So that's the way I would like to start the session, because it's not about like, I'm not an expert in this area. It's like we all have gathered knowledge from research papers that we go through or different other workshops that we attend. And the platform is for basically sharing the same experiences. You can definitely add to it, and also kind of, differ wherever you feel that there's something that doesn't work in your classroom, because everything depends on the context in which we are using it. So our students, the type of students that we have, the demographics that they're coming from, everything makes an impact on the way that particular practice is going to work in your classroom. Right. So let's start with in terms of what are the objectives of my session. So basically, we will be focusing on why formative assessments are important, and why it's definitely that we should kind of take formative assessments, and not only formative assessment, but different kind of formative assessments to our classroom. So what are formative assessments? Why they're important has already been discussed in the previous sessions that we have seen. So I would talk a bit more about what are the different multimodal assessments that we can use as formative assessments. A slight touch bit about difference, because my session is from a perspective of a DP teacher. So we will talk about why formative assessments are important even in the DP program, because we all tend to, cater more to summative assessment, because obviously it's more about performance and grades and results. So I'll touch a bit about that, and then how do we intentionally plan a formative assessment also. So we all do it, but most of the time it's incidental rather than something like a planned thing. So we'll talk about what should be your basic plan structure for a formative assessment. So let's look into the different things that we are discussing today. So I'll start with exploring, different diverse assessment formats. As I talked about, not only I will not be delving too deep into what formative assessment is, because we all know it's assessment for learning. I'm sure you've attended other sessions, you're already aware of it, but we'll talk more about what are the different tools of formative assessment that we can use in our classroom, very specific to some examples specific to DP also, but some general examples also, and other things that are linked to assessment for learning. So I'll just start with this particular image that, and I hope all of you are okay to kind of have an interactive session. If not, then I can kind of just move ahead and cover the topics, but I'll be happy if you can be interactive, just, typing, or just because there are very few of us, you can just unmute and share your ideas. But if you look at this particular image, what do you think about it in terms of what comes to your mind? So it says that for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam, that is, please climb that particular tree. What thought comes to your mind when you have a look at this image, depending on the students that you have? If we correlate it to the assessments in our classroom, what is the thought that comes to your mind? If you can please share. If you are comfortable sharing, if you're busy somewhere and you want me to move ahead, I'm fine with that also.
It is not possible for everyone to climb on tree, as we see.
Correct. And is it fair to kind of test everybody in climbing a tree?
No.
What do you think about fairness here? Is it fair?
As per their learning needs, we can style or learning style.
Correct.
And assess them.
So yes. I want to add something to this, because when you look at it's about differentiation also.
Right.
Assessing different, using different assessments for different types of learners. So if you look at this, especially in terms of content, okay, we do have students who are slow learners or who have learning difficulties. Now, for them, if you're going to use the same benchmark as the students who are in the class, average, above average, and bright students, then it is not fair. So I feel that in terms of content, I think the IGCSE does a good job in whether it is sciences or whether it is business studies. There are in mathematics where there are certain levels of papers that you can do. So you can choose. Like for DP, you have your HL and SL, but still over there are not many choices. But then in the IGCSE, you do have a choice of what paper you want to attempt. So there, I think it is fair. But over here, if you're going to put all assessments, all students in the same category and give a same type of assessment, then it's just not fair.
Right. And also, like, we were as you're talking about differentiation, and that is what majorly I'm focusing on this session in terms of how do we include differentiation in the formative assessments that we do in our class. So we'll talk about it in terms of, as you are telling that, how is it important to differentiate assessment? So we cannot modify the content in terms of, like, in the DP specifically, that SL and HL is fixed, like what content you have to do. But then what are the other things that we can modify in our assessment process to make it a bit fair for everybody that is involved in the process? So this is going to be the main theme for my session. And as we already started with, and some of you have already shared in terms of what you think about, as Ma'am was sharing about learning styles, and then accordingly how we can differentiate our assessment. Anybody else want to share in terms of if you're looking for a particular kind of student or a learning style and you use a particular mode or tool of assessment in your classroom? Like, you think that this particular assessment that I use in my classroom is catering to this kind of student in my class. And do you kind of anyway differentiate that kind of assessment in your class, thinking about those kind of students? Anybody else who's here and wants to share? No one? Okay, then let's move ahead then. So these are three things I'll be majorly talking about formative assessments. What are the main things when you're planning a formative assessment to look into? And then why meaningful feedback is important, a part of formative assessment. And then the variety of formats that can be used for different kind of learners that we have in our classroom. So, I know that it might appear to be like it's not that linked to the session that we are getting into, but I do feel that somewhere if teachers understand the reason why we should have formative assessments and why we should have different variety of formative assessments in our classroom, they would kind of work towards it. So just to cover that aspect, I'm just talking a bit about fairness and accessibility of this different assessments that we have. So why and what does fairness actually mean in assessment? So just to cover that, obviously, using variety of assessment tools is important because we have to give a chance to all kind of learners in our classroom. And not only give a chance, but also provide equal opportunities in the chance that we are giving. So we should not just give an oral presentation, okay, this child struggles in writing, so let's give him an oral presentation. But our assessment should be divided and conducted in a way that an oral learner or a visual learner gets equal opportunities to kind of showcase their work as a person who's good in with written tasks. Specifically, I'm talking about, like, if I'm looking at higher classes. So equal opportunity is important. And then these assessments should ensure that the final grade or the result that we are getting should not be biased. So somebody who is majorly good in written skill, I'm sure that I can't remove this bias in the actual IBDP exams, but at least in our formative assessment that we have, we can remove, or we can try removing this bias that comes up with one particular somebody being confident in one particular skill that they have, and that is mostly written skill that we have. And then next is about why it is important that the assessments have to be fair and as well as accessible to all the learners that we have, because we know about different learning styles, like kinesthetic learners, we have visual learners, we have numerical learners, we have those who are more audio based learners. So we need to identify these things in our teaching, isn't it? We differentiate our teaching, we differentiate our processes in terms of the strengths of the student or the learners that we have. We also differentiate basis of something like I'll say content also. Somewhere we try to modify and make it simplify it for some type of learners that we have in our class, like an average based learner or an extended learner. We try to differentiate it, right? So it's important to differentiate our assessment also to cater to these different learning style and strengths and weaknesses that we have. And again, background and experiences also play an important role. Like if you worked in a school which has students from different countries, you would realize that some countries automatically tend to produce kids who are very good in communication skills, but they might not have very strong written or skills there, so they're not able to write very well answers. So I think somewhere penalizing students because of their background experiences is not fair. So somewhere we should try to remove that also in our assessment. Promoting inclusivity, definitely all across, that applies all across, and we at least should try to provide equal opportunities in our classrooms. And I won't kind of argue on the fact in terms of maybe every exam, like whether it's IGCSE or DP exams, are definitely inclined towards one particular thing. But when we are teaching in our classroom, our regular assessments can at least ensure that we are doing these things, and that will help them perform better in their final, whatever written exams that they are taking. Now, what are the things that we have to look at when we are trying to make our assessments accessible? Then whatever barriers or challenges that you feel your students are facing, that may be due to cultural backgrounds or their language, command that they have over their language, their academic background. Some of them might be average learners, some of them might be struggling or kind of below average learners. Then also sometimes based on their learning preferences, you would see that a student, you can categorize them as not performing so well, but they might do very well in some particular aspects. So kind of giving that opportunity for them also to showcase their work. The way we communicate our tasks, I think that is also another way of making our assessments accessible. Very straightforward instructions, clear criteria being explained to them before they kind of attempt the assessment that you have given to them. All that is also important. Again, making it accessible to them in terms of that everybody has those resources that you want them to have. So providing proper resources before you are giving the assessment is important. And then again, for different kind of learners at different levels, breaking the task into smaller tasks actually works for all kind of learners in our classroom. So this is other important aspects of how we can make our assessments accessible. Now I'll just touch base because I think everybody knows what is the difference between formative and summative assessments. And before we dive deeper into different formative assessments, so I think if anybody wants to share and is in a mood, I know everybody has come back after lunch and you've had a long, lot of sessions since morning, but is anybody want to share their understanding of difference between formative and summative assessments?
So for me, the most important thing to differentiates formative and summative assessment is that summative assessment, we assess student how much they have understood at the end of the unit, and they do it in under exam conditions. We are not helping them or giving them any support while doing the assessments. Whereas formative assessments are ongoing and they are for us to know how much the students have understood, so that we can look at how our instructional methods or strategies can be, reworked if the students have not understood, if majority of the students have not understood. So it is for us, formative assessment, right. And whereas summative assessment is for the students to know where they stand in terms of whether they have achieved their targets or not.
Great, thank you, ma'am. Anybody else wants to add up anything to that?
I just want to say it's like formatives are more continuous. You can have as many numbers depending on the conceptual understanding you are targeting till the time you reach to the final thing. And summative doesn't give you that scope of at times revisiting until unless you really want to consider it to do it once again. Then it becomes into the shoes of the formative. So I think formative is more towards it's an ongoing continuous process which really help you to readjust your thing, both for teachers as well as for students. Summative is just like a end. It doesn't go further. Formatives have scope for moving it further and reiterating it and readjusting it and realigning it, and you can have data-driven
changes that you want to incorporate. Great. So you have covered everything here. So, and I was just reading a research which talks about not only formative assessment as like assessment for learning, as we all know. So we are basically, as ma'am said, we are doing it for modifying our own teaching. That's the main target of formative assessments, and you kind of guide students to move forward from where they are. And but even within formative assessments, there is a lot of research in terms of like long-term formative assessments that we have. Then we have medium-term formative assessments, and we have short-term formative assessments. So long-term is like, over a period of time, you have realized that most of the students struggle with organic concepts of chemistry, or like in maths, a particular concept of math. So you know that you have to kind of, devise ways and means to deal with that. So that's like a long-term formative assessment. Then you have like medium term, where you kind of have, again, notice that in this particular unit, students struggle with this, and then you go back and cover that. But the most effective that have been found in the research is a short-term formative assessment. So like maximum within 2 days of the time that you have covered something. That is the most effective. So you've realized that within 2 days, the student hasn't, two different ways and means that you realize that the student has not been able to understand, don't postpone it for a later time at the end of the unit kind of a thing, but come back and deal with it immediately before moving forward. So these are the 5 key strategies, and there are different ways to talk about formative assessments. But I was reading a research and I really found it very interesting that these are the 5 key strategies that you can focus on when you're talking about assessment for learning or formative assessment. So first, and we'll, delve deeper into each one of them. So I'm starting with the first one, that is how we can create tasks, questions, and then there we will also cover about different modalities of formative assessment that we can do before we move on to the other 4 that we have, which is how to make that learning intentions and criteria for success are very clear is an important part of creating a formative assessment. The kind of feedback that we provide is again an important part of ensuring the success of our formative assessment. And then how we can use students themselves as instructional resource for other students in the class, and then how we ensure that the students take ownership of their learning. So we'll be discussing all these 5 in detail. So let's start with different. I'll just start with a very basic example of a simple formative assessment that you can do in your class before we move on to the multi-modalities or different tools that we can use. So it's a simple task. You divide your you kind of open your class for a particular question related to this example is about a question in terms of how do we preserve the ozone layer. And you give students 5 alternatives. It's a simple, it appears to be an MCQ question, but it could be used as a simple formative assessment in day-to-day teaching. And depending on now, in this case, the answer that the students give in your class, like suppose if you realize that everybody has given the right answer, right? In this case, though all of them appear to be correct, but they are not. So it's kind of a trick question for the students in the class. But if you realize that majority of your class has answered the question correctly, you can just move ahead that, because majority of the class has understood. But if you realize that, majority of them have got it wrong, then you definitely need to go back and teach the topic. If you realize that there is like a distribution of where, 20% are giving the first answer, 20% the second answer. If you realize that there is that much of variation in your class, and a good tool here could be to divide your classroom into like 5 groups, 5 sections, and then everybody who's matching with a particular answer goes to that particular part of the classroom. And then you ask every group to explain their answer to the other groups and try convincing them about their answer. This helps that you also as a teacher can see what is the understanding of every student in your class, or as a group wise also you can have an understanding of that. And at the same time, what is the justification that they're giving? Because sometimes just the outcome is not important, but the process that they are following will help you understand whether their conceptual understanding is good or not good, that kind of a thing also. So this is a simple example that all of you can do in your classroom. And moving on to now, I'll move on to a bit about specifically getting into different kind of formative assessment, but also talking about the different modes of formative assessment that we have, which will cater to somewhere differentiation, where we'll talk about different learning styles. So whether you are a visual learner or an audio learner, and what kind of example formative assessments can you use in your classroom for them. So here are different types of, so here just a quick PA of how you work on your designing a formative assessment. You can start with your learning objectives. Then you need to take into consideration the strengths and needs of your students in your class, and then accordingly decide on which format suits the class students that you have, right? And maybe sometimes you might just have like a small class group, you might just have learners which are of two categories, and you don't need to maybe think about the other category of assessments that you have. So these are the 5 categories that IB talks about in terms of formats of assessment that you can use. So we have written format that could include giving an essay writing or a report writing, visual formats like asking them to create a graph or concept maps. Then you have verbal format where you can have them kind of give a presentation, have a Socratic seminar, have a debate in the classroom. Then you have numerical format where you can ask them to conduct a data analysis, create a table with the data, collect data for an experiment, then complete data analysis, or work on some kind of data that they have already collected through spreadsheets. Then the last category is performative, which is some kind of a practical task where they can showcase their work. So you can ask them to have like a small or a short role play in the class, or kind of demonstrate it to the other students in the class what they have understood. And sometimes the interesting thing here is that you don't have to like stick to one particular format to make it fair and I would say equal for all the learners in your class. What you can do is you can give, and here again I'm going a bit into differentiation in terms of give for the same topic or content. As you can see in this example, you can offer choices in the term of tasks that you're assigning to your class. So it's not necessarily that they should feel that, okay, this particular task can only be done well by a visual learner or a verbal learner or a numerical learner. So what you can do, for example, in this case, this is a task of where you want the students to understand, you want to test their understanding about climate change. So the same task, you can have different kind of, assessment being given depending on their own strength and capabilities. Like for a visual learner, you can ask them to create a concept map linking different causes and effects of climate change. So you are assessing, in this case, their understanding through the concept map they have created. Then similarly for written learners who are strong in the written skills, you can ask them to write an essay on global climate impact. Again, for the learners who have a strong control over numeracy, you can ask them to do something like data analysis of particular temperature trends. Similarly, for verbal learners, you can have a group presentation. And or sometimes, and for performative learners, you can ask them to kind of have a role play or on kind of demonstrating what are the impacts of climate change. So they can prepare a skit or something like that. Sometimes what you can do is you can make it also again to further, give them differentiation opportunities. You can give this 5 tasks. So you can have kind of a choice board in your class, and you can assign all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tasks. And they are open to choose, because we would realize that mostly our learners cannot be categorized into one group. So there would be an overlap between a visual and written learner or a visual and verbal learner. So when you put something like this on a choice board, you would see that students would also move from one particular task to another type of task. So sometimes they might choose to write an essay, but sometimes they might be more comfortable creating a concept map. Okay, now we can move on to the next presentation, slide. But does anybody have any questions till now? Or anything that you want to add up to, what I've shared till now?
No, not from my side.
Okay. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so let's move on to seeing some examples now, specifically from some DP classes about different kind of multimodal formative assessment that you can create. As I said, like giving multiple opportunities in the same assessment. So choice is always like make students, engaged, and also I think they take responsibility of their learning in that case. So here is an example of a global politics class. You could involve students and ask them to kind of create a multimedia project. Sometimes you can combine different skills and create one particular project. Like in multimedia project, it would also cater to verbal learners. So you can ask them to give a presentation, or if you're assigning like a group task, then it will play to the strengths of each learner in your group. So you can have something like a flexible grouping where you have different kind of learners put together, so they can kind of learn from each other's, strengths also in that case. So assign a multimedia project so they can create a presentation. They can also have a written report and a data visualization. So you have kind of catered to different kind of learners in the same task that you have assigned to your class. Similarly, for a computer science class, you can ask them to kind of write the code or program for a software that they're creating. But at the same time, you can also give them an opportunity to kind of explain the features that particular software offers. So they've created a video or a screencast recording what they have done, and also they have written the code. So again, you are catering to different kind of learners that you have in your class. few more examples. So you can, scaffold the task, like, suppose in history class, you are giving them a research project, which we do a lot. It's always better to kind of break down the task into smaller things that you are looking at. So what are the sources that you are using? What kind of evidence or data will you be providing to support, the research that you are doing? That kind of a thing helps, that kind of a thing helps them better understand the task you're giving, again, catering to different, I would say, like an average learner to an extended learner. So both of them are getting the challenge in this case that you would like to give. Again, simple in a mathematics class, just asking some of them to, kind of write the proof that they want to do. But for some of them who are, how lazy not to write, you can give them an option of kind of verbally recording and submitting you, like, a podcast or something to you. I think that also works. So we have covered multimodal formative assessments catering to our diverse learners. Again, I've covered learning styles. I've covered kind of backgrounds or cultural impact that you might have for students who are struggling with a particular strength. I've also tried to cover a language barrier, so you can use scaffolded tasks or differentiation strategies. So I've tried to cover a lot of differentiation in terms of product also through these formative assessments that I've explained. Now I would like to move on to the next, 5 strategies that I discussed. I would move on to the next one, that is how important it is to share learning intentions with our students and the way we do it. So I'm sure if some of you want to share here, you can add up more because I've just covered 2 pointers here. So it's important to provide students a success criteria when you are asking them to complete something like a project or asking them to write a report. It's very important to give them the success criteria, because we see that mostly students struggle because they haven't understood the criteria well. But also to add up to that, sometimes even if I have kind of deconstructed the criteria in my class, it's still difficult for them to correlate that criteria with the exact expectation. So I always use, past year students' work to kind of help them understand the success criteria. So you tell them that this particular criteria means being able to present your information in a coherent manner. Then I also showcase it. What would it look like? Present your data in a well-labeled manner. Showcase it to them. How does it look like? So using students' examples, and specifically in BP, annotated student work where, criteria-wise feedback has been included, helps students very well understand the success criteria. Also, something that works really well, and like there is a lot of evidence and research to support this, is that when you give students opportunities to design their own tests, it works the best actually as compared to kind of redesigning their test or even catering to their strengths and designing a test. The best is to ask them to design their own test. You would realize that they would always design tests which caters to the areas that they feel that they are lacking in. And slowly and gradually, maybe not the first time. First time they might just design a test which is catering to their strengths. But slowly and gradually, you would realize that they are trying to design a test that caters to areas that they struggle. And simultaneously, they will start working on those areas when they, are preparing for those tests. So at least it works. It has worked a lot for me. If you can also try this particular strategy in your classroom. Anybody else wants to add up to how do they share their learning intentions with students?
So I write the learning objective or the learning outcome on the board so that it is for them to see, and also when students, especially when they are in grade 8 or 9, where they want to, disturb the class and distract each other. So when the learning outcomes and are already there on the board, and I'm saying that, okay, today I have 80-minute lessons and these are the things that we have to finish. Then I also tell them that, see, you are wasting my time. If these things are not finished, you have to do it on your own.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so then
and
that kind of helps. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes coming back to it, when if you have a longer lesson, like an hour or 1.5 hour lessons, then sometimes coming back to it, it keeps them focused on that, that, okay, whether I'm, progressing towards the learning outcome that have been put on the board or not. I think that works also, as you're saying. It helps in terms of bringing them back to whether they're, moving in the right direction. So they are also like, oh, it doesn't appear that I'm going in this particular direction. So maybe either ma'am is not right or I'm not right, kind of a thing. So that also helps.
Yeah, yeah. So main thing,
Anybody
I
else
write
wants
it
to?
on the board.
Yeah, I think that's great. Normally we put on a presentation, but I think this works better putting it on the board because in the presentation we have moved forward and then we are not coming back to that slide. So I think your suggestion is great. Anybody else? I'm sorry, I'm not reading the chat because we are so few of us. If you're comfortable, just unmute yourself, but just have a look at the chat if somebody's sharing something there. Right. So Maria is saying that she shares learning objectives from the curriculum with the student, and then she keeps on reinforcing this when she's solving past paper questions, especially linking with the command terms. Yes, great. I think for DP, this definitely works very well, and that we keep on linking our learning objectives with the command terms, because most of our learning objectives are also actually designed by IB, including a command term that the student is able to evaluate these things or that kind of a thing. So bringing them back to that also helps to kind of keep track of their progress. Okay, so now we move on to the next part of the major things that we have for designing formative assessments, and that is about feedback. Now, we all would agree with the fact that feedback is equally important part as is designing our formative assessment, isn't it? What do you all say about it? How do you think, how much importance does feedback have in assessment for learning? So we have assessed them through our regular, tasks that we are creating. But if we don't provide them the right feedback, do you think the growth happens in the right direction?
No, so
Anybody?
I feel that feedback is very important, and when you give feedback, it has to be descriptive. So based on the criteria or the strands that are there, uh, why has the student got that particular grade? Okay, and in the task also, you say that okay, this is explicitly written, very good. Continue doing so, because then the student knows that okay, this is what is good, and I should
Good
continue
also,
doing
yeah.
it, in my next similar assignments. And when it is wrong, then underline it and write the exact thing what we are expecting them to do. So, or maybe give some suggestions. Think about this. What about this?
Yeah.
That kind of descriptive feedback is very important.
Correct. That's what, so it's just telling them that this is right or this is wrong is, I think, something that is not very, kind of putting them in that process of thinking about what they have done wrong. If we just say it's wrong, they're like, okay, it's wrong. Okay, so maybe next time I'll get it right, kind of a thing. So that doesn't work that well. But rather than that, I think focusing on the fact that different strategies I've just shared here in terms of making it forward moving, isn't it? That's the whole idea of doing formative assessments. In addition to giving us feedback for students, it is that they should be moving forward, right? So just some examples of what we can do is like comment only marking is something that we all use, right? Where we give comments, as ma'am just explained, criteria wise for DP teachers, if you're here, in terms of how do we, in our IAs and in our any extended response answers that we have, we include criteria wise marking, that we don't say that this is right or this is wrong. We don't do in DP, we don't at all do that, where we just, except for very content based questions we do, but for other questions that we have, which are all critical thinking based questions, we don't write things like this is right or wrong. Always we do things like that. Maybe that, like, for example, in English class, it says here, so your argument is strong, you can say, but so you have, as ma'am said, we have, focused on what is the strength that you are, showcasing here. But at the same time, how can you make it better by providing more evidence? So you have included this, but you can have added more evidence. Or in kind of an extended essay, you can just write, maybe these are the 5 pointers that I've noticed in your essay that you have submitted till now. But you can now share a reflection with me in terms of how would you work on this feedback that has been shared with you. Similarly, very simple one that all of us can use in a maths class, instead of telling them which are the questions that are wrong, just tell them that these, the 5 that you have done, out of this, only 2 of them are wrong. The rest of them are correct now. So, kind of instigating their thinking that what is wrong in my case. So something is right, I have done well. I think that most of our students get motivated by the fact that we have pointed on, all of us as adults also. If you tell me that, oh, this presentation wasn't good, I don't think I'll be very happy with it. But if you come back and tell me that, oh, maybe you could have added something here, or you could have improved this thing, I'll be happily listening to you and going back and making those changes, because it's progressive. The feedback is oriented towards improving me, right? So similarly, things like that, I think, works with our students also. I just, there are 1 or 2 examples that I would share with you. So like in a DP economics class, again, you've given them a data to analyze. You can provide feedback on the process that they've used. So maybe you could have analyzed like this. Maybe you could have brought information from here. And not just say that, oh, your final outcome, the analysis is not good. Like some of the teachers, you would, would just write that analysis is not good, but that's not helpful for the child, because he's wondering that I have written so much, why is ma'am saying analysis is just not good? So giving them very specific feedback in terms of what could they have improved in their analysis process helps them better understand of which way or which direction they have to move. Similarly, an example from a chemistry class could be that not only the, you can talk about sometimes, for as teachers, because we are talking about formative assessments here, also the process is important. How are they collaborating? Sometimes you can just maybe focus on that. How are they sharing their information? How are they trying to convince other students in the class? What kind of critical, comparisons are they bringing in the class? Those also kind of provide you and input into whether I am moving in the right direction. When we are talking about things like the skill of writing an internal assessment in IB, writing a research report, then we are also looking at the processes that are involved rather than just looking at the outcome. So because we are focusing on skill building also here, the ability to write, the ability to analyze, the ability to evaluate what is given to you. So therefore, definitely feedback should never be like directly right or wrong, but specifically in a formative assessment. Summative assessment, so we do mark them. We mark a cross against the answers that are not correct. But in a formative assessment, focusing on providing feedback, which is more forward thinking and giving them also multiple opportunities to showcase what they are doing. So maybe the outcome is not correct, but maybe the process is correct. So highlighting that, I think, helps. Okay, I'll just go through the chat if somebody shared something. So Maria is sharing that while giving feedback in the IA and the E, rather than focusing only on what needs to be, yeah, definitely what we were just sharing on the comment on their strengths, and then talk about how, even if you feel that they could further improve in that, then tell their strength and then what they could do to improve it further. Yes, yes. Yes, and Anju is sharing that she also shares examiner comments with the students when they revise past papers. Correct. So, what are common mistakes that they have done and what is the way to correct them? I think that also helps students during formative assessments because, again, here we are talking more about our DP students. So definitely our final outcome is also important for all of us. Okay, now quickly moving on to the next, strategy out of the 5 that we were discussing about is like students as owners of their own learning. So here I've just included few examples of how we can do it. I'm sure all of you have different examples of how you do it in your classes. This is something that we do like as something like simply like exit slips or something like that only, but making it a bit more inclusive during class discussions. So in this case also it's something like an exit slip where you have like a red and green slip. And when we start with everybody showcasing the green slip. And as when we move forward in that particular topic, then the students can change or flip their slip from a green to a red. And then the teacher immediately can understand that that particular student has not understood what is happening in the class. And a good way to do here or involve specifically because we're talking about a bit older students here, to keep the students engaged and involved rather than the teacher going to every student who has raised a red card and starting explaining it to them. It becomes like, we always see that the other students would start losing interest in the classroom when you do that. So what we do here is like, what I do is like, whenever the student turns into a red flip, I see the other students, what they are showcasing. Suppose there are other students in your class who are still showcasing a green. It's a good opportunity to bring like a peer support here. And you can ask a student who has well understood it to explain it to the other students who are present in the class. So it works very well and you can take it to your classroom and see how you can implement it very easily because students love explaining what they've understood to the other students, right? And then it also kind of breaks the monotony of the class where you are just explaining something. So you realize that, oh, somebody has understood, let's just flip and then help others understand it through the other students' understanding. So this works very well in, I think, all classrooms. As much as I've discussed with other teachers in my school, it works for most of them. So you can take it to your class. The next category is about how do we make students as instructional resource for one another. So how, and for older students, peer support, and we know that the, previous research, all of the researchers have pointed towards that the students learn best by explaining it to others. So they learn better by seeing demonstration. They learn better by, kind of the least impact is obviously of teachers teaching. As the Bloom's taxonomy, we all know that the least impact is of teachers teaching, and the maximum impact is when students explain it to others. So that is something that again for elder students at least it works very well. So this is one strategy that I use in my class where you provide them with a checklist of the criteria that you have, like for all your internal assessments that you have, and before the IAs also you must be doing a lot of report writing or research paper writing in your class. So what works well here is, or science experiments also, lab reports that they're writing. You can create a criteria checklist, and you can share it with all the students. And the task that you can assign them is that whenever you complete your IA or your lab report or something, it's something similar to what we call as peer assessment, but it's more like that you assign that responsibility to every student, that you have to get this criteria checklist completed by another student. So their student will check your work, mark against each criteria that has been shared or deconstructed criteria that we normally use to create a checklist. And then you need to submit your lab report along with that. Now, what this task does is it has like multiple benefits. One is that the student who is checking also takes responsibility of the task that is completed, because he cannot complete that criteria checklist until and unless he has himself understood the success criteria. So now when the discussion happens in the class and when I go through the checklist, it's not only about seeing that whether the student's work is correct, but I also question the student who has completed the checklist. Okay, why didn't you see this? Or what was missing here? You didn't notice this kind of a thing. So it gets all the students involved in the class. And also, as we were discussing, the idea here is to make each student an instructional resource for the other students in the classroom. Does anybody have anything to add to these criteria that we have discussed in terms of how you do in your classroom? Or do you think it can be implemented in your class, or do you think it's something that appears to be okay in discussion, but maybe difficult to take it to the classroom? Please feel free to share. Okay, nobody wants to share anything. I don't know. I hope that, when it's like nobody's sharing, it is either the session is becoming very boring or everybody has understood everything. So I don't know, it's which way around.
Smita, whatever you are doing, I had already taken this session in the first session. Same things. So I think it's a repetition for some people. I don't know. I don't know if everybody was present. I don't know. Because Maya, I had done this only, Maya was there the first session.
Yes, I was
but
there.
It's a recapitulation. Okay, please pay attention.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, we are doing.
I can bully Maya because she's a friend. We are chaddi buddies and we work together. So I can just tell her.
Okay. And actually I was very worried about this particular session because then I kept on reaching out to Saheli and asking her, can you share what others are doing? Because I don't want it to be a repetition of other sessions, because even if I'm doing it for DP, but strategies remain near about similar across, obviously for junior school, it would be a bit, for PYP and all, it would be a bit different, but for the other students,
but the examples that you have given, they are really good. And I think for us right now, the participants over here, it makes more sense because I had taken it a general thing,
right?
For the whole PYP, MYP, for everybody, so that they have some tools to take with them to school. Yeah.
Right. So I hope others who are present here, I hope you are getting something out of it. And frankly speaking, even if you are doing it, it always helps to kind of validate our, understanding in terms of whether I'm doing is it correct or not. Or maybe I can just add a bit to it to make it better, because your students get bored with what strategies you take to them, so they are already had enough of it. So maybe adding something. So I hope, you are getting something out of it. I hope so. But yeah, sharing, I think with each other, I think always helps. So if you want to share, please, unmute yourself and share, because we have a very small group here. That's the advantage we have. And I think any workshop that I've attend, like Ivy's workshop that I've attended, the virtual ones, I think I learn always more with not what the instructor is sharing, but actually with the, that discussion that I have with my teammates or, group mates and people that are present in the session, always. Because if you've all taken out the time to attend a session on a weekend, I'm sure you're all like active learners who want to learn something new, who want to move beyond what you're doing. Yeah. So I think sharing always helps. So go ahead. I think, does anybody want to share anything out in terms of strategies of what you do in your class? Yeah, I think others are sharing in terms of they also find checklist very useful in their classroom for IE work and work that they do. So that's what Maria shared. Anybody else who's here wants to share anything?
In fact, my business management principal, okay, now it's been quite a few years that she's not taught, but she has a few students for IA. So then with the new guide, and she's a workshop leader also for category 2 BM. So I had told her one of my chemistry teacher who is new in DP, I had created a IE checklist using ChatGPT and Gemini.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So no.
Right.
I used this notebook LM.
Okay.
Okay, to create a checklist for the students with examples. So then
Right.
my friend, she told me, can you do it for this business management? I said, yeah, sure. So I made it customized to students for the students to understand, because when we
Right.
have a checklist, we have an understanding of what we are looking at, how we are
Yeah. What
looking.
are like? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but then for students, it was like some prompts, okay, which will tell
Yeah.
them
What they need to
what to
do,
write.
like, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
What to do, what to include. Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
Correct. Okay, so as we are moving towards, I think, towards the end of the session, so just quickly, why importance of planning is another thing that I feel sometimes as teachers we miss, because we are like, okay, this is happening in the classroom, we are all doing it, but I think giving a thoughtful planning to it before we actually take it to the classroom is important, because different formative assessments can have different purposes. Sometimes you might be interested in seeing what are the gaps that you have identified in student learning. Sometimes its purpose might be that whether everybody is able to take this process or do this lab experiment or not. Simply that much. Sometimes it might be that whether the data evaluation is happening or not, that kind of a thing. Sometimes it could be just a skill, a mathematical skill. Is everybody able to use GDC properly in the classroom? So I think depending on your skill that you're planning to use, I think because it should not be, I think for a lot of things, at least I talk to my teachers that it should be intentional and not incidental. Like even skills, I think a lot of when I do a lot of sessions in ATL skills, I realize most of the times teachers say, "ये तो हम करते ही हैं, ये तो होता ही है class में." But I think giving a careful thought to it, more of like planning something explicitly is important rather than it's just appearing that okay, I'm listening to discussions in the class and that way I'm understanding what my student is able to do. I think a bit more of specific inference that you've planned for the assessment that you're doing. What is the feedback that you've planned for that, and what is the final expectation from that assessment is important for teachers. So I think anticipating inferences is important. What are you looking at from your assessment? This is a planned assessment for what purpose? Maybe can students apply this concept? Foundational ideas, are they clear or not? Are they progressing towards moving to the next level or not? Just using it as to guide the next steps in the instruction. Agar if you're linking your prior knowledge with the current knowledge, then is that happening or not? So assessments can have different purposes. So your inference should definitely be clear when you're planning your assessment. You don't want that confusion in the class and carrying on that confusion to that particular student also, that okay, ma'am is trying to assess this also as well as this also. So making it clear to them also that this is why I've planned this assessment, I think helps. So just a complete year of whatever we have discussed. So how do you plan an entire formative assessment? First thing, we start with our learning objective. What do you want to conclude through the process that you're seeing? Because the learning objective is also sometimes wider. So maybe you are using a term like evaluate. Now, evaluate will have its own sub-terms like, okay, whether the child is able to bring different, viewpoints, whether the child is able to bring different kind of data to their that they are doing. So before they reach evaluation, you have different parts and bits to also to see. So your inference can cater to one particular part at that point. Then you can choose your assessment format catering to different learning styles that you have, written, verbal, as we have discussed. Then what kind of feedback will you provide? Because it has to be forward moving. Your feedback also has to be thought about carefully. What do you want to observe during the task? Sometimes just the observation during the task. Maybe what kind of viewpoints the student is sharing in a TOK discussion. That is also sometimes important in a class like theory of knowledge, right? If we have DP teachers here. And then how will you incorporate? The most important thing which gets missed is that we all plan formative assessment, but we don't plan how we will be incorporating it in our teaching process. And the teaching process will not just be going and modifying and teaching it again. There are other things also that we can do as modification to our teaching process. So I think as far as I'm concerned, I think I have near about covered everything. It's just an example. So your objective is given. You want to assess students' understanding. Task is given. What are you trying to do through that is mentioned here. Feedback, what kind of feedback will you provide is mentioned, and what you observe during the entire process is mentioned here. So it's the same formative assessment task, but if you planned it, then you have included all the specific things that you're looking at. So I think we don't have much time. We have only 6-7 minutes. So I had planned a task, which again, there are very few members and we don't have a breakout room here. But something like, if you can think about, if everybody who's present here can think about one particular task, and I'm not sharing the document, I think we don't have that much of time, but the document had like, what would your objective be? And then based on your objective, the same thing. So based on your objective, what task can you plan? What are you looking at in terms of feedback? if you want to share anything, anybody, please go ahead and share. I think only Ashika ma'am has interacted throughout the whole session. Anybody else who's present here and wants to share a particular, objective that you're looking and more tasks and inferences that you think you can include for that particular assessment that you have created in your class, just go ahead and share in terms of what you've done in your class this week, the week that has just gone by. Anybody who's present here? Nobody? Ma'am, do you want to share something? Because you're the only one who has been interactive in the whole session.
I do not teach any students right now, so I cannot say anything
Right.
about.
You must have gone through some
but-
lesson plans or
yeah,
guided somebody.
But during this particular session today, when I was doing the sessions on formative assessments, in fact, I use pair deck, okay, to so that it is interactive. And for each particular slide of presentation, I had teachers put in their answers, or I gave them scenarios or questions. And that made me understand whether they were on the same page or whether they understood what I was trying to make them understand. So yeah, so that was so my presentation was made in such a way that I had a particular technique, okay, and before explaining that technique, I had a task where they would think about it. A VTR was there, and then they had that interactive part where they wrote down their answers, and then I saw the answers and we discussed about it, and then I gave them the actual answer. Okay.
Right. So you
And
had
I found
everything
that,
planned.
yeah, most of them had knew, or they were on the same page where I was trying to make them understand about whatever topic that I was doing.
Correct. So you had everything planned. You had the task planned, what feedback you wanted to share with them. You had that planned. You were also observing in terms of what they were sharing. It was more of a virtual thing, but otherwise you would have also seen and gone and met everybody and discussed with them what was the thought process. Like in a breakout room, we would go and discuss with that. So you had everything planned. So that was the whole conclusion of my session in terms of, so we covered, and if I just move to the conclusion, we covered things like what are the multimodal assessments, so verbal, performative, numerical, you should include different types of assessments. Then it's important to think about the forward moving feedback that you give to your students. It's important to bring ownership in this particular process of giving students responsibility of their own learning. So we talked about checklists. We talked about also making the class more engaging and passing on information from one student to another, that we discussed. And finally, we discussed about how planning your own formative assessment specifically is important rather than just incidentally doing it in the class randomly on a particular day. So I've just kind of summarized what we have done in the whole session. And we have some sharing in the chat box that I'll just go to and share. Okay, so great, Maria, thank you for sharing. So she just shared in terms of objective is like, suppose she has chosen the objective of to explain trends in ionization energies in periodic table. Her task would be using data from the data table, plot a graph for ionization energies or given elements. And the inference that she had in mind when she was planning this was from the shape of the graph, deduce a reason for the shape and how it can be linked with the forces of attraction. Very interesting. And the feedback that she would be sharing would be that ensure students use key terms to explain their answers. Yeah, very specific subject-specific terminology that we are looking in their answers. Great. And during this whole process, she's monitoring the graph plotting skills, the data analysis skills, and collaborative skills. Great. I think perfect example. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so I think we are near about, we just have the last 2 minutes to end the session. And as an exit, I would just ask if you want to, maybe you can just share a thumbs up or thumbs down in terms of what you feel. Did you think that my topic of the session and I covered all those things or not? So maybe a thumbs up, a thumbs down, any other reaction you want to give, I think that will be helpful. Or if you want to type something in the chat box and share your understanding or anything, one particular thing that you're taking away from the session, that would be also great. Thank you, everybody. I think, Kalyani, thank you for the thumbs up. Others, I'm not sure if, I hope you have some takeaway from the
Yeah,
session.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.